Welcome to the Therapy and Prayer Podcast. I'm your host, Camille. I'm a licensed therapist and clinical social worker, but more importantly, I'm a Christian who really loves the Lord. Here we take a faith-based approach to all things mental health and wellness because the Bible tells us to guard our heart and mind, and sometimes we need a little bit of help with that. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Therapy and Prayer Podcast. My name is Camille. I'm your host, and I am just always so glad and so grateful that you're taking the time to sit here and listen to me or to sit here and listen with me. I hope that everyone is doing well, that this year is going well for you so far. We're still feeling out the first quarter. I like to give the year the first few months. We give it the first quarter to kind of feel it out, and then we can come back and revisit those prayer boards that we made when the second quarter rolls around. So I hope everyone is doing well. I want to talk today. Well, actually, I want to tell you where it came from. So, little story time. Every once in a while, I get caught going down a rabbit hole of some of my old posts. And I went down one of those rabbit holes on my Instagram from like 2020, 2021. I had completely forgot about this, but I started this random little series called Things No One Asked For. And I made these just random videos about stuff that nobody asked for. And I had so much fun with it, and my friends really enjoyed it. And it was fun. I was doing TV reviews when Insecure was on, and it just was a good time. But I went down this rabbit hole, and as I was watching those videos, I was like, wow, I just look so happy in these videos. And there's like a levity that I felt like I had. And part of me kind of got a little bit sad. There was some sad nostalgia in looking at an older version of me or younger version of me that was really just from 4 or 5 years ago. And it just got me thinking about the process that we go through when we are growing and evolving as God is molding and shaping us. And we have new versions of ourselves periodically. I think I've heard it said that you're a new person like every 7 years. I don't think that's an exact science, but we all can look back on different seasons of our life and say, you know what, I'm a different person than I was in this area, etc. And as we are growing and evolving and changing, we're leaving behind past versions of ourselves. And sometimes there is an element of grief in that. And so I think that was a part of what I was feeling. And so I want to start at least by talking about some of the grief that exists when we grow and evolve into new versions of ourselves. Because in order to have something new, a lot of the times we have to put down something old. And what do you do when the old thing that you're putting down is yourself, or things that you used to enjoy doing, or relationships that you used to have, or maybe even a mindset that you used to have. Sometimes as we get older and we know more and our eyes are open and the veil is lifted in different areas, there sometimes is more of a sense of responsibility or heaviness, right? Once we have this awareness of the things that are happening around us. And so maybe there's some grief for the innocence or the naive mindsets that we used to have. But that's a very real thing that happens a lot. And so I want to talk about that because I see it happen in a lot of people. This is something that I have worked with clients on over the years of just grieving your past, grieving a version of yourself. This falls in the same category as a lot of that inner child work that we hear about when we talk about therapy and therapy things. And we talk a lot and spend a lot of time on our inner child, but that is not the only version of ourself that we've had to leave behind or grow out of or grow away from. And some of the most, I think, transformative work that I've done with clients has been not just dealing with their inner child, but dealing with your inner adolescent or your inner young adult. If you think about your inner young adult, like who you were in your early 20s, or your inner adolescent, who you were when you were like 16, 17, there might be some stuff, that comes up for you. And that's okay. And that's very, very, very normal. And it's really important, I think, to normalize some of these mental and emotional things that we go through so that we can lean into it and work through it. We already know what happens when we try to avoid things. What happens when we avoid is that we just suppress and it just builds up and builds up and builds up. It's not healthy for us. It doesn't actually go anywhere. And so it's important that we share our experiences so that we can see that we're not the only one who has felt this way. And if I'm not the only one who's felt this way, then maybe that will make me a little bit more courageous or confident to share my experience, and we help each other grow that way. So when we look back on past seasons, and I guess as I was watching some of those old videos, and I really was kind of missing some of that, I don't know, more energetic spirit, or, and maybe it's because I feel like the last couple years of my life have just been incredibly heavy, but I found myself thinking, oh, I miss when I used to do this, or I miss when I didn't have to worry about that, or I miss this, and we have this nostalgia, but I was thinking back to how I was actually feeling right at that time. And yes, things were very different, but I don't know that I was as maybe grateful as I could have been. And I say that because we often look back on different things and different stages of our life with this like yearning and longing. Now that we have a deeper appreciation for certain things, that's why we look at it that way. But at the time, things just felt regular for me. And I think this happens all the time because at that time, I was thinking back to when I was in my early 20s and missing and longing and yearning for that. And in my 20s, I was thinking back to when I was in high school and missing and longing for certain aspects of that. But we have this habitual thing that we do of looking back and yearning and longing and missing it. And I think what that says is that maybe we don't do the best job of being grateful for what we have in the present. It's like if I knew then how valuable my peace was, or if I knew then how valuable my sense of humor was, or my friendships, or whatever, right? If I knew then what I know now, I would have handled those things differently. I would have stewarded them differently. There's a quote, well, I don't think it's from The Office, but that was where I heard it, where he said, I wish that we knew we were in the good old days when we were in them. And that comes up for me when I think about things like this. Like, here's what we do all the time, right? We look back on pictures of like what size we were when we were in high school. And it's like, oh, if I could just get back to that, if I could just get back to that size, baby, high school was like 15 plus years ago. Okay. 15 plus years ago. We need to let it go. We need to let it go. But we do have to let certain things go in order to make room for the things that are going to be coming into our life, or for the things that God is trying to do in our life. But I started thinking about the fact that we're maybe not as grateful as we could be in the present moment. And I think it's because instead we have this habit of being very self-critical. Y'all have heard me talk about this before, like self-criticism and self-compassion. But that is the prevalent mindset, or the prevalent relationship trait that we have with ourselves is self-criticism and self-critique. Because all those past versions of myself, I know that I was still criticizing myself a whole lot. And we do not even recognize the criticism as it's happening, the internal monologue and the narrative that we have about ourselves, who we are, what we deserve, all of that. It's really easy for me to look back on a version of myself from 5 or 6 years ago. Now that I've lived these last 5 or 6 years and I've seen the growth that I've seen, and God has walked me through and has carried me through so many things, right? And I am wiser now. So yeah, I can look back through that lens and see the things that I wish I would have been more grateful for. But then I think about, man, in 5-10 years from now, will I look back on who I am now with that same sad nostalgia? And I don't want that. I don't always want to look in the rear view with remorse that I wasn't as present or as grateful. or that I wish I would have been more present and more grateful. I really want to practice more gratitude now so that that's not the narrative moving forward. But I do think that the self-criticism makes us ungrateful because it paints this picture of ourself and our life that we are only the things that we do not like, or that we are only comprised of our deficits or our shortcomings or our failures. That is the narrative that we create for ourselves when we see ourselves solely or primarily through that self-critical lens. So we're really talking about our relationship with ourself, every version of ourself. And this is one of those concepts, again, it's maybe a little bit abstract for some, but if you're with me, then you're with me. This relationship with yourself is the one that you've had the longest, right? You've had a relationship with yourself even before you knew you had a relationship with God, right? We all had to get to that point where we are choosing to live for Him and to prioritize that relationship. But we had a relationship with ourselves without even knowing it. And that is the relationship that is often really neglected and abused even. And the effect of that is a bit of what we're talking about now. We get to this point where we've seen some personal growth and we look back and we're like, oh man, things actually were okay back then. Or, I sounded lighter, my spirit was lighter, or I didn't take things as seriously or didn't feel as heavy or whatever it was. And now I can say that. But back then I wasn't saying that because back then I was still criticizing something else. There is always something that we can criticize about ourselves, about our life, about our appearance, about our character, about our job, about our relationships. There's always something to criticize, and it does not take much for us to go to that place. If you're honest with yourself, then you know that what I'm saying is true. It doesn't take much for us to find something to nitpick about ourselves and to just pick apart. And over time, maybe that changes, or hopefully it does. But that doesn't change until you become aware of how that exists within you now. You don't get to a point where you can be less self-critical until you acknowledge how critical you are now. And I think I'm a pretty reflective person. I do a lot of thinking and reflecting and journaling and this and that and processing and all of that. So even as I was looking back on old videos and things, there are old videos of me processing and thinking through things. And there was one where I was talking about self-compassion, really where I was kind of first introduced to it, and just having these kind of aha moments about trying to be better to myself so that I can see more growth. And especially now, as I'm continuing to grow in my faith, I can really see the impact of a self-critical lens on my relationship with God, on my willingness to obey and to be obedient, because the self-critique leads to ungratefulness. And if we are not grateful, then it's hard for us to be hopeful. And if we're not grateful, then it's hard for us to trust that what God is doing is good. So all of these things are related, right? And there's this interesting place, I think, that exists in Christianity. And this is a part of the overlap, right, with our mental health, because we talk so much about dying to ourselves and being a living sacrifice. And we're not here for ourselves, but we're here to serve others to the glory of God. And we are. And so to think about how we feel about ourselves feels wrong sometimes, could even feel sinful, because we're not supposed to be thinking about ourselves, or at least that is what we have learned. That's what we were taught, or maybe that's part of the message that we took away from it. But the way that you interact with and what you believe about yourself has an impact on your capacity and ability to carry out God's will for your life effectively. So everything is always going to come back to that. If you are very critical of yourself and do not have a compassionate relationship with yourself, then you're going to be so doubtful of your ability to do the things that God wants you to do. When we're so doubtful of our ability to do the things that God wants us to do, then we are more hesitant to do those things. We're more resistant to doing those things because we don't believe that we can do it, because we're always so critical of ourselves. And we're so critical of ourselves, and that makes us ungrateful. And it makes us overlook some of the blessings. It makes us overlook some of the ways that we have already grown. It makes us overlook the small things. And we've talked so much about how we can see God in the small things, but it makes us overlook those things. So this is all a part of how we are able to carry out God's plan, if we're able to carry out God's plan. Okay, so going back to how I felt when I was watching all these old videos and things, I don't know exactly what it was. Actually, I think part of it was, I think that my tone of voice sounded like it was higher. And I was like, did I really used to talk in that high of a tone of voice? It wasn't, I don't think it was very different to how I speak now, but to me, it was noticeable. And I was like, dang, have I really been through that much in these past few years that I've lost even the levity in my voice? Or is it that I felt like that's how I was supposed to sound? I really don't think so, though. I really felt like I had just been through so much, or that the last however many years have felt difficult. And it's easy for me to catch things like that because I listen to my own voice all the time. I edit this podcast every week, so I listen to my voice all the time. I'm very familiar with my tonality and how I sound, very familiar with all of that. So to me, it stuck out like a sore thumb. And I was like, wow, have I really been going through it like that? So much so that even the way that I speak has changed. And mind you, I was a grown adult in those videos. I was 30, I think. I was grown. So I was an adult. So, we can still grow and change even in adulthood. But I think that was surprising to me. But it's not uncommon. We're going to be affected by our experiences and by the things that we go through and walk through. I think I just didn't realize how maybe heavy I have felt, mentally and emotionally. And I think I've been reflecting on that. I've been reflecting on the fact that I guess I have been feeling kind of heavy in the last few years for a myriad of reasons, of course. I don't think we're always aware of how our experiences affect us. So that was, a nice little bit of insight to see maybe some of how my experiences have affected me. But anyway, I think I'm still processing through that, y'all, because I'm just over here talking and thinking through. And so I think I'm still processing a little bit of that. But yeah, we're going to be affected by our experiences, which is a part of why we grieve who we were before some of those experiences. I don't think that I will ever get back to a point where I'm speaking in a higher tone of voice. I just don't. But it is very natural for us to be affected by our experiences, and we don't always realize it as it is happening. We don't realize it until we look back and say, oh, wow, I look really different. Or, oh, wow, I sound really different. Or I feel very differently about that thing than I do now about it. Which is why I think it's so important that you're documenting your life in some way, whether that's through a journal or video or audio or pictures or whatever it is. I really think it's important to do that in some way, shape, or form. But I just started thinking about my younger self, and I was like, I think she just seems really kind of carefree. I wasn't carefree though, because again, I was grown. So as I was thinking about that, oh, she seems so carefree. I started to feel bad for how I know I treated myself in that season. Because I'm telling you, I have a very long history with self-critique and self-criticism. And so when I'm working with clients and we're working with our younger self or our past self, there are a few things that I kind of ask them to think about because you think about, the things that your younger self has seen and experienced, and you think about the strength that version of you had to have to get to where you are now, and the tenacity and the resilience and all of that, right? So that brings up, I don't know, different feelings that you have about yourself. And so there are a few different questions that I often ask about your younger self. So we're going to do a little bit of an exercise here. Think about a version of yourself from the past. Maybe it's the version that you feel like went through the most or suffered the most. Um, or maybe the version of you that that you miss. Think about a version of yourself. Doesn't matter what age. Think about them. Think about what they were doing and what they were feeling, what they looked like, even maybe what were they wearing, whatever. And ask yourself, what does this version of me need to hear? Is there anything that this version of you needs to hear? A lot of the time when we think about like our younger self, like our child self, sometimes we need to hear it was not your fault or you did the best that you could. What does this version of you need to hear? Are you blaming this version of yourself for anything? Do you need to apologize to this version of yourself for anything? Do you need to forgive this version of yourself for anything? And the reason that we're asking these questions is because part of the grieving process is getting to acceptance. And sometimes there are some things that we are still holding on to from our past. Sometimes there are some things that we're still blaming ourselves for from our past. And that's making it difficult for us to move forward into who God is trying to mold us to be. And so in order to really like let go and move on, we have to accept some things about ourselves. We have to apologize to ourselves. We have to forgive ourselves. Like sometimes we really need to do that work and we're not always even aware of what it is that we are holding on to. Or sometimes there are some things that we're trying to get back to, and that's making it difficult for us to be focused on what God is trying to do with us now. So we can get stuck in the past. We can get fixated with a version of ourselves from the past, and that can stop us from being present and focused and obedient now. But we know that God is trying to do a new thing and that He has a plan for your life that called for all of the experiences that every single version of you went through. And it calls for you to go through what it is that you're walking through now. Like we are, and my preacher says this all the time, but we are ever evolving, never becoming. So there is always growth and evolution and change that is happening. But sometimes when we are so tethered to the past, to a past version of ourselves, a past mistake even, then we're having a hard time with this evolution and transformation that God is trying to do in us now. So it is important for us to assess our relationship with ourselves, your relationship with yourself now, but your relationship with yourself from the past even, because you have to get to a point where we can accept and be grateful for where God has us and be grateful for who it is that we've grown into. Sure, there's always something that we could criticize about ourselves. We could. But what if instead of criticism, the thing that we maybe are not thrilled about in ourselves, what if we ask God to show us what to do with that part? What if we decided to surrender that part of ourselves to God instead of just criticizing ourselves for it? What if we ask God, what is the purpose of this part of me? What if we ask God to teach us something about Him through it, right? Like we can nitpick and criticize and be upset about something and be ashamed about a part of ourselves or a part of our story, or we can use that to glorify God in some way. So if I think about, oh man, I feel like I was so much more carefree back then, maybe now I'm not. What I can reframe that as is God has really shown me a lot and has revealed a lot of Himself to me. And in that revelation, He has entrusted me with more information. He has entrusted me with more responsibility and has been revealing my assignment to me, which I take very, very seriously. And so there's not a lot of levity in that, and that's not a carefree thing at all to me. But it's because it's such an honor that I feel to be walking with God so much more intimately now. And when we walk with God more intimately and we have that increased awareness, and we say all the time, oh, the veil has been lifted, but that puts a responsibility on us, right, to steward well what it is that God is trying to birth through us. And so, yeah, I think it's reasonable that maybe I don't always have the same like lightheartedness that I had some years ago, but I don't have any less joy. In fact, I probably have more joy now, even though I'm not as carefree or lighthearted, which is really interesting, I think. So I can acknowledge that. And I think there's a part of me that grieves the lightheartedness. And I think that is okay. It's okay to be maybe brokenhearted or grieved about moving on from a part of yourself, right? That you really enjoyed. And the Bible says that God is close to the brokenhearted. And maybe that's you as you are grieving a certain part of yourself or your life or your story. God is close to you even when your brokenheartedness is about yourself. Why wouldn't he be? He wants us to have a healthy relationship with ourselves so we can have a healthy relationship with him. He wants us to have a healthy relationship with others so that we can have a healthy relationship with him. So if this is where you find yourself, then find comfort in the fact that God is close to the brokenhearted, regardless of the source of the brokenheartedness. That does not matter. And it might seem kind of silly to ask God to come into your grief about a past version of yourself. Like that might be kind of a silly thing, but it's really not. I think a lot of us sometimes can get stuck in replaying certain things and living in regrets or having remorse for things in the past. And the past can really consume you if you let it. And one of the stages of grief is denial and refusing to move forward from it. And that can consume you if you let it. So maybe we do need to invite God into that space of brokenheartedness and grief over a version of ourselves that maybe we didn't know that we loved so much, or a version of ourselves that we were maybe really mean to or really cruel to. Like there's a lot of different ways that we can view our past self. And there are a lot of different ways that we can kind of interact with that. But regardless, God is able to be there with you through all of it. Okay, let's move on to our scripture of the day. I'm going to pull one of my prayer cards today because there is one of the categories in here is comfort. And I think that that's really appropriate for what we're talking about, especially when we're talking about like grieving any kind of grief, but even grieving any part of yourself. Okay, this is John chapter 16, verse 24. Until now, you have asked nothing in my name. Ask and you will receive, that your joy may be full. You know what this is bringing up for me? I think that there are some things that we do not talk to God about that we won't bring to him because we think that they're too small, or we think that they don't have anything to do with our spirituality or with our faith. But I don't think that there's anything that we can't bring to him. There's not anything that we can't bring to him. And so, I keep saying like, oh, this may seem kind of silly. This may sound kind of silly, whatever. But I think that this is so appropriate because we may not have thought about talking to God about our relationship with ourselves and helping us to move through our grief for a past version of ourselves, or asking him to heal our relationship with ourselves so that we can be ready and primed to grow into who it is that he wants us to be. But sometimes maybe that's a part of the like pruning process, right? Sometimes maybe we have to go through that so that we can grow and be fruitful in the season that God has us in now, but also for the season that he's taking us into. So think about what some of the barriers are to your growth. Like, is there a certain area of your life that you've been kind of resisting growth and change and evolution, right? Like, does it seem like maybe God is that God has been kind of like trying to guide you in a certain direction, or Are there some things that you're having a hard time letting go of that you need to grieve? Have you talked to God about them? Until now, you've asked nothing in my name. Asking you will receive that your joy may be full. It doesn't say ask only about the big things. Ask only about the things that other people know about. It doesn't say that at all. We're supposed to bring everything to God. And so the things that exist internally only with us, even that we can bring to him. So do some reflection and see if maybe you do need some comfort in this area or some healing in this area in your relationship with yourself. Maybe you're like me and you look back on a version of yourself from a while ago with like a sad nostalgia. How can you invite God even into that space? Maybe we need to ask God to help us to be more grateful now so that we don't have the same kind of sadness or longing 10 years from now when we're looking back. Maybe that's what we need to ask for. God, help me to be more grateful. God, help me to be more present. God, help me to be more open to what it is that you were trying to do in my life. God, help me to be teachable and malleable. Help me to be obedient as you order my steps. Help me to let go of the things that existed for a season and that are no longer a part of what's necessary for me now, for where it is that you're taking me now. What does it look like to involve God in the spaces of your life that you don't believe he's interested in? He's interested in all of it. All of it. Because all of it is who you are. There's no part of us that we can keep from God. Like he's already in it. He's already aware of what it is, right? But this is where like our free will comes in. Like he knows that it's there. He knows that it's there. Do you want him to do anything with it? Do you want him to do anything about it? And this could be for anything, right? Like I know today we're talking about this whole past self or whatever. And to be honest, I feel like this episode is a little bit all over the place. And maybe it's because what we really need to be talking about is just evaluating if there are some spaces of your life where you have not invited God into. Maybe it's not necessarily about just about healing the past relationship with yourself or grieving the past version of yourself. Maybe that's just an example of one of the things that we don't come to God about. But what else? What else are you keeping from him? The Lord is the best and biggest and most efficient resource that you have. As you are living your life, as you are growing, as you are healing, where have you excluded God? Where have you asked nothing of God from? Like, where have you asked nothing? And why have you asked nothing? He's waiting for you to ask something. And I think that, some of us have gotten to this point in our walk, or have been in points in our walk and in our faith where we feel like, what's the point in asking? I don't know where this is going. Holy Spirit, you doing something. Maybe you've gotten to the point in your prayer life where you feel like, what's the point of asking? So I'm not going to ask anything. And I was definitely there. Where what's the point of asking? Because you're going to do what you're going to do anyway. But this says, ask and you will receive, that your joy may be full. So whatever it is that we're asking, we may not receive that exact thing that we're asking, but we are going to receive whatever it is that's going to allow our joy to be full. Ooh, we may not get what it's asking, but we're going to get our joy. Ooh, this is good. We may not get what we're asking, but we're going to get our joy. Bring whatever it is to God. And he's so all-knowing that even when I bring God maybe a specific request, he knows what it is that I need behind that request. Maybe he knows what that request is going to lead to, or he knows what it's coming from. And there have been so many times where I've not received what it is that I'm asking for, but I have received something completely different. And somehow through that thing that I didn't know I needed, I was able to have a sense of joy, or a sense of peace, or a sense of security, or a sense of just knowing, a sense of comfort of something. Ask and you will receive, that your joy may be full. That's the outcome. The outcome of the ask is that our joy is going to be full. So what is it that you have not asked God about? What is it that you have not brought to him? Because that's probably where you could use some joy. The thing and the spaces that we don't want God The spaces that we don't think God's interested in, the spaces where we don't think he belongs, are the spaces where we need his joy. Those are probably the areas of your life where you feel the darkest and where you feel the most lost and the most confused. And that's where God needs to show up the most. And so he's sitting there saying, you haven't asked me anything about this. You have not talked to me about this at all. And you're probably there struggling through it, trying to figure it out on your own, hitting your head against the wall, suffering. When God is like, you haven't even talked to me about this. He's going to give you what you need to have some joy in that thing and through that thing. You know, my prayer life has really evolved. My prayer life has evolved, is evolving. And there's this, I always come back to like, should I be asking for specific things or should I not? Should I just keep everything very vague and very general? Because if I ask for specific things, then I'm going to be too attached to the outcome. And if and when it doesn't happen, then I'm going to be upset. So instead of just being upset, let me just not ask for anything specifically. I was in Bible study, I think it was last week. Did I talk about this in the last episode? I might have. But we were talking about that verse that says, approach the throne of grace, with confidence. And I used to believe that meant, ask for what you want confidently. As long as you ask for it confidently, then you're going to get it. But it's not about the ask. It's about who we're asking. That's the confidence. We approach the throne of grace knowing who God is and being confident in who he is. And that has to be the lens for everything that we do. And that has to be the lens for everything that I bring to him. So I can come to God and ask for something specific. And as I'm asking him for this thing, I'm asking him with full knowledge and confidence that he is in complete control. Therefore, whatever happens is also in his control. And whatever happens is a part of his plan for me, whether or not it's the specific thing that I'm asking for. Because most of the time, I don't even know what I need for real. I'm asking for what I think I need, for what I think I want. But I have confidence that God actually knows what I need and that whatever he's doing in my life is to supply my needs, to supply for all of my needs. I didn't think that's where we was going today. I love when that happens though. Where are you trying to shut God out in your life? And how is that affecting you? Like, how's that working out for you? Think about if you can find like one or two areas of your life that you have never prayed about. And it might be so trivial. Like what to wear. I don't know. It might be very trivial. But think about one or two areas of your life that you have never prayed about. And just focus on those this week. Like pray about those specifically and intentionally this week. And just see. Like we're doing an experiment. I'm going to try to do the same thing. And just see what happens when we allow God into every part of our life. He created all of it anyway. And it's all a part of his plan and not our own. Ask and you will receive, that your joy may be full. That was so good because we always need joy, honestly. Count it all joy when you suffer diverse temptations. Y'all know the verse I'm talking about. Count it all joy because it produces endurance. That's where our joy comes from. So think about the area of your life that you've never talked to God about. Pray about that this week and then tell me how it goes. Okay, let's move on to our question of the day. Just as a reminder, if you have a question that you want answered on the show or a topic that you would like to hear, you can send it to me at therapyandprayer@gmail.com. You can leave a comment wherever you are watching or listening to this, or you can shoot me a comment or a DM on social media at Therapy and Prayer. So today's question comes in response to an old episode that we did last year on self-hate and depression. It says, I loved this episode, especially when you said that not wanting this feeling is enough proof that this can change. My question is, how do you cope while slowly building self-worth and self-love? My social, love, and work life suffers, and I wonder if depression medication would be a good bridge option, and if you've heard success stories in this. What we're talking about here is the process of trying to change your relationship with yourself, because some of us have this like really hateful and self-critical relationship that we mentioned earlier. So that that feeling can lead to a lot of depression, right? So sometimes our depression really has to do with our beliefs about ourselves, our belief about how worthy and how valuable we are. So this question is talking about how do you cope with depression, I think, while slowly building self-worth and self-love. That's a really good question, because they're so, like, intermingled. But I think that first we have to. This is going to sound strange, but I think that we need to lower the bar that we are setting for ourselves. We want to wake up and like just have and just love ourselves, right? And like no longer have these feelings towards ourselves. But it doesn't always work that way. It doesn't always happen that way. And so you would be surprised that sometimes it's like in the very small things that starts to rebuild those foundational bricks of your relationship with yourself. And so when we talk about depression, right, some of the symptoms of depression have to do with not taking care of yourself, poor hygiene, like not cleaning your space, maybe not eating well, not sleeping enough, like some of the basic self-care principles. And so maybe it's just in doing some of those things on a more regular basis because you know that you need to, even if you don't feel like it. There is this concept called behavioral activation, and this is not the whole like definition of it, but a part of why we talk about behavioral activation is because sometimes you have to do the thing first, and then like the feeling will come after. When we want to feel it first and then do the thing, like I want to love myself more so that I can take better care of myself, but it needs to be opposite. Like you start taking better care of yourself so that you can start loving yourself more, right? So sometimes that's a part of it. But the other thing and the other way to start building that, better relationship with yourself is by acknowledging how you're feeling. So earlier we were talking about gratitude. And gratitude and compassion really go together. Compassion is not a cop out. We feel like if I give myself too much compassion or acknowledgement of where I am and what I'm feeling, then I'll never be motivated to do better. But that's not the case. That's not what compassion is. Compassion is acknowledging that where you are and what you're feeling is hard, and it's acknowledging that you are able to do hard things. It's giving yourself the grace to figure out how to move through this difficult thing or this difficult situation without blaming yourself for not already knowing how. Do we see the difference there? So just learning to give yourself a little bit more of that will also help you start to lay that foundation for a more loving relationship with yourself. And if you are doing this while you're also struggling with depression, then they'll kind of go hand in hand a little bit, because the compassion will allow you to acknowledge what you're feeling like. I'm feeling a little bit depressed today. And it will hopefully give you the motivation to do some of the things that are going to be healthy for you, depression. If that means taking a shower today, if that means opening your windows or getting some sunlight or some fresh air. If this is the space that you find yourself in, then of course I'm going to recommend getting some therapy to help you through, because that's a really hard place to be in. So find a therapist or some good godly counsel or some good friends or just supportive and trusting people to help you through it. But know that the relationship that you're needing to work on is the relationship with yourself. Know that that might take some time and that there's not just one way for it to look. And know that we have to get to self-compassion before we can get to self-love. We're not going to love everything about ourselves. We're not always going to like ourselves. But can we have compassion for ourselves as a human? Like you would have compassion for another human being. It's not a cop out, but it is an acknowledgement of where you are, and it's giving yourself permission to not automatically know how to get out of that space, because that permission gives you the time to figure it out. If we were just like, ugh, I shouldn't even be struggling with this. Why am I dealing with this? Other people are not dealing with this. Then we're just going to beat ourselves down so much that we don't know where to start, and we don't believe that we'll ever be able to get out of this space. So compassion is just space. Think of it like that. We're like suffocating under the pressure that we put on ourselves. Compassion just gives us a little bit of breathing room, a little bit of space. And then, of course, asking God to come into that space with you If you're struggling with self-hate, maybe you're struggling with identity a little bit, then look up however many verses you can find on what God says about your identity and who you are and how valuable you already are to Him. And try to meditate on those as often as you can. Meditate on those as you're taking care of yourself, and be doing those things in tandem, I think can really help. Okay, I'm gonna be honest, y'all. I don't know about this episode. I don't know where it actually took us, if it got us anywhere meaningful. Hopefully it did. Hopefully you got something out of it. But either way, I thank you so much for being here with me as always. I think that's all that I have for you. Yeah. Thank you so much. I love you. And I'll talk to you soon.